I want to talk about why Community of Christ is so well positioned to take advantage in some ways of this emerging opportunity. One of the ways that we're well positioned is that we moved beyond our exclusive truth claims beginning in the mid-20th century. So the idea that we were the one and only true Christian church, which was quite common in the 19th century as we were birthed, but we moved beyond that starting in the mid-20th century, courtesy of makers of church thought like Roy Cheville and Dwayne Cooey and Clifford Cole. We are extraordinarily well positioned because of our lay ministry. Doerr talks about what a challenge it is for shrinking congregations in big buildings to care for their building and pay their minister. And in many cases, they simply can't anymore. So 2 and 3 congregations might be trying to share a pastor, but increasingly they are moving to our model. We have pioneered what it can look like to run congregations, to be the church with lay ministers, with people who have full-time employment, but are also ministers, or perhaps are retired and are also volunteer ministers. We're, I believe, extraordinarily well positioned for this emerging opportunity because we are non-creedal, meaning that we don't have a statement of belief that you have to sign in order to be one of us. We do have basic beliefs. We have positions on lots of theological questions, but you can dissent and you can do so publicly. We typically ask that you not do that in public ministry, for example, from the pulpit, but we are non-creedal, and there's room for a significant exchange of ideas and disagreement on these questions of faith. This one makes some people a little uncomfortable, but this is a picture of the John Johnson home in Hiram, Ohio, and that is where Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon had this vision that we canonized, section 76 of the Doctrine and Covenants. We don't think about it or talk about it much, and when we do, we think about how it describes the 3 degrees of glory. But when you read this section carefully, you'll discover it is universalist. We have this long tradition of universalism, this idea that God's love and grace are so powerful and so all-encompassing that all are enveloped in that love and grace. This was controversial in the 1830s and for some still today, but we have this long tradition of universalism, this idea of universal salvation. God's love and grace are all-encompassing. Our polity is going to be very helpful. That means how we choose to govern ourselves. We are hierarchical versus congregational. Now, that is challenging in some ways, so there are downsides to this, but what that does mean, and Doerr complains that the United Church of Christ is not, it makes it very hard to make decisions that are in the best interest of the whole versus the best interest of the individual. But we are hierarchical, which means we are better positioned to make decisions that are in the best interest of the whole body. Our bylaws and policies allow us significant flexibility as we move forward, as we try and figure out how to be the church in the years to come. Significant flexibility to experiment. Critically important is that we are a principle-based people versus a rule based people with enduring principles or core values to guide our decision making. And I can't stress enough how important this is as we work to be the church in different cultures around the world. The fact that we are principle based is extraordinarily helpful as we try and figure out answers to difficult questions that make sense to cultures around the world. We are well served by our diversity. Remember, we have one female in the First Presidency. Our presiding bishop, our chief financial officer, is female. In the Council of 12 Apostles, 5 are female of the 12. We have Africans and a French Polynesian and a Honduran and a Welshman and a Canadian and an Australian. That's me, although I don't sound like it. Significant diversity in the leaders of the church. We have significant denominational agility. I know that sometimes it's frustrating the pace at which we move, but compared to many organizations, we do pretty well. But we know we're small enough that we're relatively agile, but we know we have to do better. And we are working hard at moving towards more simplicity and agility and flexibility. Really helpful as we navigate our way forward in a postmodern world is the idea of faith as journey. We have long thought of our faith as a journey from the Restoration Trail, upstate New York to Kirtland, Ohio, to Independence in far west Missouri, to Nauvoo, Illinois. This, where it actually was a journey where sometimes we chose to travel and sometimes we were forced to travel. The faith as a journey. Think of Mark Shear's church history volumes, Journey of a People. We think about continuing revelation. So faith as journey will position us really well as we move forward. Our emphasis on spiritual formation is attractive to many who are spiritual but not religious, who want to explore spirituality but are nervous about organized religion. This has been a long journey and a difficult journey at times, but our emphasis on being inclusive is going to be very helpful, from ordaining Black men in 1865 to ordaining women in 1984, to ordaining gay and lesbian members in the USA in 2013. Our focus on being inclusive is going to be very helpful. Even before the pandemic, there was a growing desire to reconnect to nature. We talk about the sacredness of creation. And that has grown, I believe, exponentially during the pandemic. We'll see once we move out of the pandemic what our participation in these camping programs look like. But I believe that our expertise in retreat and family camping experiences will be really helpful as we move forward. So 2011, I believe, was a critical time in the life of the church. I was sitting in the Independence Temple when President Vesey introduced for the first time the mission initiatives. So if the enduring principles are the who we are statements, the mission initiatives are the what we do statements. And that was a paradigm shift, a significant shift between Christianity as a belief and Christianity as a way of life. Now, this is, for me, is just kind of this symbolic moment in time where we made that pivot from here's what I believe to here is how I live out those beliefs. Now, I say we made that shift, but I recognize that we really didn't. We just kind of started thinking about it. But that 2011 pivot helps us focus our energy and resources on building Zion, the peaceable community of God on earth. And I use 2011 as a convenient date for that shift, but in reality, this is not new. Look at the words of Joseph Smith III. The Latter-day Saints are looking forward to a renewed earth from which all evil and wrong will be banished, and upon which a reign of righteousness and peace will be established. That is the heaven the Bible teaches, and towards which our church members are hopefully pressing. The kingdom of God in heaven as it is on earth, the kingdom of God on earth. Long been a focus for us. So I talked about how postmoderns learn differently as a challenge in the context section, but we have developed significant expertise during the pandemic at online worship experiences, at screen-based worship experiences. So suddenly what was a challenge is now an opportunity. So as we begin to move back into congregations in some places, I desperately hope that we will not forget the people that we have connected with online. I desperately hope that in many places, we will end up with some kind of a hybrid model where there is joint and equal participation between people in person and people online. And it's really important that we think through what this might look like so that the people online are not second-class participants. I'm seeing some congregations already start to try and do this, and some of them have 2 screens, and they are very careful about making sure that major participants are both online and in person. So the person presiding might be in the building, but the person who's speaking is online. And one screen has the person's talking. The other screen features the chat, and people are encouraged to participate in the Zoom chat, whether they're in person or online, so they're all sharing the same experience. Just a few ways that people are trying to make sure that they don't leave behind those who have found us and are engaging with us online. So what was a challenge is now an opportunity. The same is true with the challenge of mobility. Our children moving away and so no longer able to participate with us. I can't count the number of stories I've heard of congregations with 10 or 15 active participants who during the pandemic grew to 30 and 40 active participants. And in a number of cases, it's because their children or their parents from the other side of the country or the other side of the world are now joining regularly and participating in congregational life. So the challenge of mobility is now the opportunity of connecting people around the world. From President Veazey's A Time to Act. The future church is being formed by a basic concept. Our chief purpose is to birth, nurture, and multiply communities of disciples and seekers engaged in spiritual formation and compassionate ministry and action. This basic blueprint, spiritual formation, community, compassionate ministry and action, is true to the vision of Christ. Everything else, like organizational structure, resources, funding methods, congregational forms, etc., should support this primary purpose. From section 164, 9a, on emerging opportunities, by the grace of God, you are poised to fulfill God's ultimate vision for the church. Now let's shift our focus from restoring Christ's church to restoring Christ's mission. So what do I mean by that? As I have talked about many times, I'm sure many of you have heard me talk about it, and this is particularly timely since tomorrow is Pentecost. Remember that as a faith community, we were founded on the desire to restore Christ's church as we understood it through our reading of the book of Acts. So the book of Acts was the template for what we were trying to physically recreate on the shores of Lake Erie. So we tried, if you joined us, you probably packed up your family and moved to one of our gathered communities like Kirtland, Ohio in the 1830s. And we did that because that is what is described in the book of Acts. All believers were together in one place. We were desperately concerned for the plight of the poor in our earliest years, because that is what is described in the book of Acts. And out of that concern, we experimented, we tried to live all things common. So the surplus of the wealthy could lift up the impoverished, because that is what is described in the book of Acts. And we are Christians with temples, because that is what is described in the book of Acts. It's so early in Christian history, of course, they're still Jewish. The temple still played a significant role in the life of the church. And we spent much of our existence focused on restoring Christ's church. Priesthood offices, as we understood them, organizational structure, very intensely focused on the book of Acts. Then 2011 rolls along. I recognize this is an oversimplification, but this is the way it helps me to frame it. 2011 rolled along, and as President Veazey introduced the mission initiatives, he grounded them in Christ's mission. Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So again, I interpret this as a momentous shift from restoring Christ's church, the organizational structure, to a call to restore Christ's mission. We were called, and always were, but seem to vocalize and recognize that we were called to restore Christ's mission, that Christ's mission is our mission, that we are his hands and feet on the earth today. We say it, we think it, I actually think we believe it, but we don't always live it. So what I want to talk about today with you is how can we more fully embody Christ's mission? How can we live what we say we believe? How can we turn our Christian faith from a belief to a way of life? And in doing so, how can we transform a denomination into a movement? How can we become a movement? So let's explore some new ways to be the church going forward. Whenever I have this discussion, some people get nervous and think I'm saying that I believe there is no future for congregations as we have them and buildings as we have them. And I am not saying that. I believe that it will be critically important to have groups of people gathered together in a number of cases in buildings, particularly those who are fully utilized for mission. But my hope is that those will be resource congregations, as Dorauer describes them, that they will have the people, the skills, the talents, the resources, not only to function as a congregation, but to support the development of new expressions of the church. So I, without question, see a role for congregations and congregational life, and in a number of cases, buildings going forward. But my hope is that they will be also supporting the development of new expressions of the church. So what might those new expressions be? We don't know yet, but I want to float an idea. I had a chance to share with some of the World Church ministers a few weeks ago, but I want to continue developing this idea. And this idea is that these resource congregations, or in some cases the mission center, will be supporting the development of enduring principle or mission initiative-based affinity groups. And I don't like that name is a placeholder. I don't know what we would call these things. And we don't really need to worry about it until we have to change the bylaws of the church at some point, which is one of the foundational documents of the church. It lays out our structure as a denomination and how we will be set up. It talks about mission centers and congregations. And right now it talks about emerging congregations, but as we discuss, we'll need to change that, because I don't think these are emerging congregations that we're going to be talking about. So affinity groups, people who are passionate about a particular idea that they want to pursue together. And they might have a connection to a congregation. I'm guessing that they will in many cases early on. But these will not be congregations. And the goal is not to take them and force them into the congregation. These are separate entities that are being the church in a legitimate form, that are living Christ's mission. I've not fully worked this out yet, but I keep thinking of it. This is actually based on something that President Veazey shared. Maybe this would look something like a solar system. So let's spell sun, though, not S-U-N, but S-O-N. And then imagine mission centers and congregations as planets, and these new groups as moons that are in the orbit of the planets and in the orbit of the sun. They are influenced by them. Maybe they are resupplied by them. So a congregation might support one of these new groups. They might support them in various ways, as we'll talk about. But imagine this kind of solar system of like-minded groups, whether they be mission centers or congregations or affinity groups, all kind of in the same orbit. Again, there would be no expectation that these would become congregations. Some might choose to do so, and that's wonderful, but that is not the point of launching these. They would be likely members and non-members who share a passion. So I'm sitting this morning next to the Mississippi River, and I love kayaking. So I had this dream of gathering other people from my community who are passionate about the sacredness of creation. And we might get together on a Saturday and round up all the trash that we can find that is floating down the river. It's not hard to find, and pull out the tires and the styrofoam and the plastic, um, and do that in a way that is grounded in the sacredness of creation. For maybe I am passionate about scripture study. I'm passionate about continuing revelation. So I want to pull together a group of people in my community, and together we explore the scriptures. Or maybe I am passionate about abolishing poverty and ending suffering, and I know that my community has a problem with hunger. So I'm going to partner with other organizations that already exist to support the Nauvoo Food Pantry. And I will gather others who care about that as well. So that's an important element. Partnering will be really important, I think, in many of these things. I talked about how if we're thinking about it like a solar system and orbits, well, maybe a planet is resupplying, a congregation is resupplying or supporting the needs of one of its satellites. So that might be through providing sacramental ministry. So maybe as I'm talking to members of my Sacredness of Creation group, and I discover that 2 of them are going to be married and they're looking for a minister, we can, through the congregation that is supporting or the mission center that is supporting, connect them with a minister to provide the sacrament of marriage. Or maybe they have a baby who needs to be blessed, or maybe they have a health crisis and they're interested in the sacrament of laying on of hands. So sacramental ministry could be provided by the congregation or mission center. Lots of details to be worked out. Right now, the bylaws of the church make it clear that leadership is through priesthood. So does that mean that only priesthood could lead one of these groups? I hope not, but I don't know. That's a detail to be worked out. We'd want to develop best practices, things like an emphasis on shared leadership. We want to avoid groups that are formed around somebody who's acting like a dictator that makes all the decisions. Community Christ values shared leadership. We feel strongly that financial transparency is important. So there'd be a number of things to be worked out related to best practices. We eventually, but we're not going to be able to do this soon, but eventually we would need to explore bylaws changes. So for example, right now, there would be no way, or not a good way, for Mission Center and World Conference representation for the members of these groups. This might be uncomfortable, particularly if they are non-members. What if somebody is fully engaged and participating and very supportive, but for whatever reason isn't baptized or confirmed? Well, that means that they are disenfranchised. They can't participate in the business of the church. I'm a little uncomfortable with that, but for that to change, that would require bylaws changes. They couldn't participate in making decisions at conferences without a bylaw change. So, after listening way too long to me, let's talk. What are your thoughts? Is this idea intriguing? Is it scary? Are you ready to dive in to do some experimenting with this? You want nothing to do with it? Initial thoughts on this idea of kind of affinity-based. What are your passions, and how would you like to live those out in your community in a way that relates to living out Christ's mission? I can only see 3 of you, so if you want to just try unmuting and sharing, we'll do it that way, see if it works.
I really like that idea. Can you hear me?
I can. It's Kathy.
Yep, I really like that idea. I think that's exciting. I think that helps us do the missional ideas that we're called to do. And I think in this time we have a lot of, persecution of people. We went to some SDA Korean people, and the Asian group is being harassed, and I think we're providing a safe space for them. And I think that we can use our church as a way to encourage people to have a safe space to worship and to be encouraged and to be cared about. So I think that really goes hand in hand with what you're saying and how things can go. And I really, that's exciting.
Sounds like a worth of all persons group.
Yeah. Yes, it's exciting. So.
Others.
Yeah, this is Steve Bouvret. I have a friend that I used to work with before I retired at a local hospital who has a passion for helping. He would like very much to form a group of people to raise money to help give scholarships to kids or give scholarships to people. And that's never happened yet. And it's always been in the back of my mind, because as you're talking about these affinity groups, I'm thinking, wow, there's a perfect situation, because Bob's not a part of the church, but has this thing to want to do this in the community. And I guess I'm stuck a little bit on how to get that ball rolling. So I'll have to do a little more praying on that. But this does inspire that thought quite a bit.
Sounds like a developing disciples to serve with a broad definition of disciple.
Hey, Lach, I'm curious, is there some, overlap or working together between affinity groups with, maybe differing but interrelated interests or, ministry ideas? Is that part of it too? Is some of these affinity groups working together on projects across the mission, across the mission field and maybe across mission centers as well?
I love it. I don't know if it's part of it yet because we haven't designed it yet. You haven't designed it yet. But yeah, I love that idea. And I think when you talk about across the mission center and across maybe mission centers, I think that's going to be critical. So this is going to be kind of hard to understand because it was for me at first, but mission centers are non-geographical, even though we think they are, because we call them things like the Michigan Mission Center. So sometimes we've created them to be geographical, but they don't have to be. But we have made field and mission center boundaries into silos. And there are good reasons to make sure that we're thoughtful about protocols when providing ministry across the mission center or across the field. We got to figure some of that stuff out. But I think that it's critical that we reach out and partner in the church and out, and online worship has made it clear that our boundaries are really arbitrary. They're artificial. They don't really mean anything. When you see now worship services with people from 4 continents participating, and they're from 4 different fields, and so yeah, the boundary thing we've got to figure out.
Lach, I think this is great. For many years, I think we've sat and talked about it and thought about it, but we didn't do it. And I feel that I've made comments several times to different people. I would like to maybe have a church service once a month, and then the rest of them we're out doing things for other people or creating things for other people to come to outside our building or whatever. I'm excited. I hope it all happens before I leave this this planet one day, but I think it's more what would be restoring Christ's mission, not a building that we live in or are part of or expect people to come to, because most people probably don't want to do that, but it's through relationships. And we know that even in the past, I can remember my father saying women did more missionary work over the clothesline in his day than, and brought the people to the church, and then the priesthood took care of them. And I'm saying, hallelujah, I want to go on the ride.
So your comment sparked a number of thoughts. I know of a congregation in the South who in the summer would shift from kind of the traditional morning worship to service projects on Sunday mornings. And every summer, as they started, they would grow throughout the summer. They would get more and more people participating. And then they would shift back to the traditional model and they would shrink all winter.
Yeah, what does it say?
Yeah.
So Lach, years ago, I'd say 60 years ago, in the Grand Rapids area, we have 5 or 6 churches that are close related to each other mileage wise. And I kept thinking and saying once in a while, what if each one of these buildings would be an entity in themselves? I mean, outreach for a pantry or clothing, and people that wanted to do these things would migrate to those particular buildings. So what you're introducing now is something I've thought about, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, a long time ago anyway. So this is very, very exciting, very exciting.
So for me, the spark was kind of, it should have been 60 years ago with you, but for me, it was, I was watching actually I wasn't watching, but sometimes I'm worshiping with Beyond the Walls in Toronto, Canada, and I missed a Sunday, but all week my Facebook feed was filled with people who had watched this worship, had participated in this worship, and there had been a challenge given to do something in your community during the week and report back on Facebook. And all week my feed was filled with people talking about the amazing things they had done in their community that week. That's kind of what inspired this idea. And I just started thinking, okay, think about how much effort goes into planning the Toronto service, for example, and the gifts and talents of the people there. They do an amazing job, and they're not the only ones. There are numerous mission centers and congregations that have really high quality worship experiences, and they're online right now, but in some cases, obviously they'll move back into a building at some point. What if we continue to take advantage of those wonderful worship experiences, and then instead of 5 congregations planning worship, writing the sermon, cleaning the church, paying the bills, there's one that the 5 are supporting and participating in. And that means that the resources, whether it's time, talent, treasure, of the other 4 are freed up to be the church in new ways. So right now we're duplicating a lot of efforts. What if all those resources, one of my undergrad degrees was economics, so I just think about how inefficient some of what we're doing is. What if all those resources are freed up to be shared?
Brother Lach?
Yes.
Hi, this is not Roger Elkins, this is Todd.
I thought, Todd, I've been looking at you thinking, I didn't know Roger looked at, let me stop there.
He is right. He is right here. So I have a couple questions for you. First off, this is a joke question. It's not Church 3.0, it's 3.1.5. That's my joke.
Yep.
The serious question is, as somebody who worked as a church as an appointee, the appointee contract, implied appointee contract, I never signed anything when I worked 11 years for the church, was broken, I believe. Now, you were not in the Council of 12 at that time. You're asking us to trust you. And I'm going to say, how do we account for contracts that have been broken?
Yeah, all I can say is my heart breaks. I obviously don't know any of the details, but I'm sorry if we did that. We did that. I can't fix that.
No.
But I can say, let's step out in faith together and try it.
Are you,
But I won't,
and
I won't blame you
are
if
you
you don't
sure
want
you're
to take me
saying
up on
that?
that.
That's my,
Yeah, I won't blame
Yeah.
you if you don't want to take me up on that.
I will blame you if we, let's take it up. I'm with you, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, well, let's talk more, and
Sounds good.
I just think there are some incredible opportunities in front of us. And I think we have no choice but to step out in faith.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm one of the emerging congregations. So how does this affect our ability to plant and grow? We started out as a church plant, and then we were renamed as an emerging congregation. And this pandemic has basically put us back to square zero in terms of doing our planting, because just as we were starting to establish or reestablish credibility in our community, we've been cut off. So how can you sort of speak to how you replant in this new paradigm?
So depending on the wishes of the people in the emerging congregation, and I apologize, I can't see who was speaking, but depending on the wishes.
That was Alan at Detroit Hope.
Okay, hello, Alan. So if the desire of the people at Detroit Hope is to restart and continue the plan that you were on, this I think will not impact that. Meaning you will have every opportunity to do that, and the same and maybe more support to do that. So I don't see this as taking the place of those who want to be congregations or those whose goal is to be a congregation. This is in addition to, not instead of. But I will say, I think we have too many traditional congregations. Too many of our resources are going into caring for the buildings. And I'm not speaking about any individual group, because I don't know the details of many of them. So Alan, I think if it is the will of the people at Detroit Hope to try and jumpstart that plan, I and the Mission Center leadership will be extraordinarily supportive of that.
Well, I appreciate that. I think we are part of the new group anyway, because our building is more than just the worship building. Our building was for tutoring, for feeding, for, we did almost all of what you were describing already. So it's, in our affiliation, it's very loose. We already have what you're talking about. We have people who have been coming for 5 years who have never been baptized. So yeah, I think it's way past needed.
And I think Detroit Hope is a shining example of the kind of partnerships that I'm hoping to see develop elsewhere also. Fully utilizing the physical building by using it to house multiple ministries.
Can I share something we tried at Park of the Pines?
Please.
So I have an affinity for eating. I think a lot of Community of Christ people do. And I have an affinity for good conversation and community. So before the pandemic, we had what we called a foodie weekend. And people gathered Friday night. Saturday morning, we all went to the local farmers market. And everybody purchased something unique from the farmer's market they thought would be interesting to include in our evening meal. Then we came back to the grounds and we all spent time planning the meal and cooking the meal and creating a lovely place outdoors to eat. And then we had a beautiful dinner party that night, and we had some conversation starters, and we just had a lovely long dinner with lovely conversation. And I think that this could be something like the affinity groups you're talking about. We thought this was something that could happen maybe quarterly or monthly. Of course, the pandemic dropped on us, and that's the first and last time we did it, but we hope to get back to that. It was a really great weekend.
So Winnie, another reason I love what you're describing is that is what a number of the earliest Christian communities lived out as communion, a love feast, I think they called it. That was sacramental for them. We would call it that today. That was their communion meal. They would come together in love and satisfy hunger and thirst. I love the idea, and it's, we've talked a little bit about it in the last few years, but I see it's growing. I see more and more dinner churches where that is church as you've described it. Although I love what you're talking about even more, because it's a weekend together, planning and preparing and developing relationship. In a number of areas, a number of congregations, it's simply the meal. That is the only church they do. They come together. They might start with blessing the bread, and they will share in a meal, maybe a short 2-3 minute talk from somebody about a gospel-based topic, and they might finish with blessing the wine, the water, the grape juice. It is a sacramental meal, and that is church for them. The community gathered together in relationship over a shared meal. I love it.
Hey, Lach, Dave here in Big Rapids. Can you hear me?
I can, Dave.
Okay, we have a weak internet connection, so I hope this works. A couple of thoughts. First of all, I really like the idea, and I think this might be an opportunity for some of us with small buildings and facilities that are in good condition, paid for, and not a burden. Maybe there are aspects of this that allow the use of our buildings for outreach activities that partner with others. And I realize there might be some insurance or liability issues, but I just see an interesting opportunity with small facilities in many of our communities that maybe we can use our church building in ways we had not considered. And the other thought I would like to share is, ironically, even though the thrust of this is not gaining membership, ironically, we might actually gain membership doing this as a nice little side benefit. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to stress again, I am not opposed to buildings. And Dave, I know you were not saying that. For everybody, I want to say that again. I'm not opposed to buildings. I'm opposed to buildings that sit empty 6.5 days a week and that we might use an hour or two. That is not good stewardship. We need to fully utilize the buildings that we have to support mission. And I think through partnerships is a wonderful way to do that.
Lach, this is Sarah Allen.
Hello, Sarah.
I wanted to share something that I'm working on and that I think fits into this well is I'm a big environmental activist, and we've been working on this last week. I was part of a statewide environmental justice conference that was absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that was discussed was the idea of how do you encourage marginalized people to be environmentally minded and thinking in terms of they go to a local store and they can't buy an LED light because it's not even an option. It's not even there. So what I'm thinking in terms of this is that idea of finding those in the state or throughout the country that are environmentally minded and that kind of thing, and not creating, it's not just about creating events, but working with legislative ways and that kind of thing of helping communities to help people to be able to fix some of those inequalities of being environmentally minded or that kind of thing. So what I'm thinking is an affinity group could be, like I said, statewide or nationwide, where we're looking at, okay, if that's not an option for people to go and buy an LED light or what, or just that kind of thing of people being able to discuss and work on how to affect their communities to be able to think differently and help that. And for me, and I'm thinking in terms of how do I go to my local, I know our local one is Consumers Energy, and they're constantly going to schools and handing out light bulbs to the kids. Well, how do you do that and bring that so that you are bringing that to the community, and bringing those options? Because a lot of people don't even know that there are other options to be able to help them be more environmentally thinking and minded. So that's something that I'm thinking that could fit into an affinity group like that.
I would think it'd be easy to develop partnerships with those utility companies to more directly connect to the people with the needs. I love it. And so some of what I think we could be talking about are going to be in person, but as Sarah suggests, we now have not just the technology, but the know-how to develop these groups that span the world. that they do not have to be just the people on your block. They're people who share your passion wherever they're at.
Lach,
Yeah.
this is Esther.
Hello, Esther.
I'm concerned as I listen to all of this, I'm concerned about perhaps the congregations in our area who don't have internet. There are, we have so many wonderful opportunities, but I wonder how many people in our particular congregations surrounding here who can't do this because they don't have an internet in their church, or the people at home don't have them. Of course, a lot of them are older and don't want to mess around with it. But, when we talk so much about everything on the internet, we have enjoyed the Zoom things and the classes and all this kind of thing. And this today, just to be able to sit here at our home and do this. But something, I don't know where this fits in, but even with what Sarah was talking about, I'm sure there's people who are interested in that kind of a thing, but they don't have the internet. And so anyway, I think that's a problem we need to address somehow or other.
Yeah, coming from a town of 1,100, I understand the problem with internet issues. And so let me also clarify that I think one model is using technology and Zoom to connect, but I think that the same model can work in person. It is the people in your neighborhood. I don't know how many congregations and how far apart they are in your part of Michigan, but is there still a way that we could consolidate, and some of us who love worship planning and preaching and et cetera can do that, and others can participate in person, but then they will have time and resources to devote in other ways in the community. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify. I don't see this as just an internet or an online model. I think it can be, but I think it can also be in person.
I agree.
I see a hand raised.
Vicki Sanford.
Great.
Vicki Sanford.
Hello, Vicki.
We have worked in our hometown. We're in a small area as well, but we have worked with all of the Dominical congregations in this area to do a food pantry. In other words, we do it as a town, not as a branch. So that plan started with my parents when I was in high school, and there was a need, and it is still continuing today. And sometimes just reaching out to the other congregations in your community can sometimes be opening doors for other things that you didn't even imagine.
Yeah, I agree completely. Again, partnerships, I think, going to be critical part of going forward. Critical part of going forward.
Hi, my name is John Congleton, and
hello, John.
We are, I would like to host a meeting in Sanford for possible uses for the Sanford campground, exactly what you just described. Possible ways to reach out into the community and possible ways that we might become very missional. I would like to invite all of you to contact me so I can send you information about this meeting. Your opinion here is critical. We absolutely need the bigger cross section of ideas and opinions we get. I think the closer we'll be to being on the mark. You can contact me at campers9@yahoo.com, and I will send you information on the meeting, and any of you that would like to participate in this meeting are welcome. This is just simply going to be a brainstorming session, but your brain needs to help us storm. So contact me if you would like to participate.
Incredibly exciting. Let me say something here. You all do not need my permission or Dan's permission or the Mission Center Presidency's team permission to be the church. But just in case there's any hesitation, you have it. You have permission and encouragement to experiment. Now, I also, though, would ask that you do that in consultation with the Mission Center President team. And I would be happy to help in any way as well. And Jessica and Dina, because we haven't worked through all the issues yet. So we still need to be thoughtful about child protection. We still need to be thoughtful about insurance. So there's still things that we got to figure out. So please experiment in consultation with us. But let's give it a go. Let's try. I don't intend that to devalue the wonderful effort and work that is going into traditional Sunday morning worship as well. I think both are important, but by continuing to do that wonderful traditional worship in some areas, folks that are fed by that can be fed by that, and then they're freed up to devote their energy to being the church in new ways.
Hey, Lach, this is Rich Allen,
Hello, Rich.
pastor of the Blue Water congregation. And as I sit and hear about affinity groups, it reminds me a lot of when we started the Blue Water congregation. Our ultimate goal was to have quarterly gatherings, which would serve as kind of community building and worship opportunities with some education. And then from there, wave groups would develop. Waves because Blue Water wave, but sounds very similar to an affinity group, where like-minded people would find a community service project or some type of mission geographically that they were excited about. I see a real opportunity here for the church to do things like that. Perhaps affinity groups that are not affiliated at all could see an opportunity to put all their energy into the missional part of it and then gather however frequently, make better use of our campgrounds or our historic church sites or things like that. I think it could really take off and kind of take the burden of planning something every week that may or may not be well attended. If you've got a whole body of people coming quarterly or monthly or whatever was decided, you can really create kind of a special worship and fellowship environment that could really empower people to go about doing mission in their affinity groups.
I love it. I love it.
Lach, it's Gary Gordier here.
Hello, Gary.
I've heard your concern about no broadband in our church. And it is real, particularly when you start moving out into more rural areas. I just wanted to let people know that there is a Michigan Broadband Coalition that is their mission in life is to try to expand broadband throughout the state. Each county has opportunity to have their own subgroup of this larger group. And if you're not involved, try to get involved. I'm a part of the Michigan as well as the Midland County Broadband Coalition. And there are hundreds of millions of dollars now being funneled into the state to expand and push broadband out into our communities. And I think the more voices we can hear about that and the concern, the more successful they will be in deploying it.
Thank you, Gary.
I wanted to jump in on that too, just because you don't have to be rural to be without broadband. I live in the middle of Detroit, and none of my community can afford broadband. So, we have broadband all around, but we had to go and resort to leasing phones so that my community could even phone in for church. So it is a real problem. The other thing I want to throw out is I'm a convert to Community of Christ. And one of the things that has frustrated me since I got here has been that we don't educate our children ourselves. Every major denomination I've ever belonged to or touched has had their own school system. And I think that it's a great disservice to our community that we don't raise our children, because the world doesn't raise our children with our standards. And I've always said since I've come here that the campgrounds seem to me a perfect starting point for us to be able to educate our own children, but also community's children. A lot of kids that I serve in my community would value being able to be taken away for even a week to the campground to learn in a safer setting. So one of the things I would love to see is a proposal to use the campgrounds as an educational facility as well as just a campground.
As an added piece to Alan's concern about not being able to afford broadband, right now, their families based upon income can get $50 per month free internet access, or it's a reduction in any cost connect to the internet. If you just go to any of your landline companies or cell phone companies and so forth, and go through the process of filling out the paperwork for that.
Great.
This is Pam Luce. First, I want to mention a comment was made, Lach, if you could cease the screen share, if you could end that, we could have more of a gallery to see one another.
Happy to do that.
I wanted to pass that along. I just want to say, I so appreciate this morning. I'm just, as I've listened to what you've shared and how you've laid everything out, I am filled with this amazing combination of deep peace and excitement. It answers so many things, and it puts words and language and images to where we are. I appreciate that you took the time to identify for us those pieces in our own history and church denominational structure that, and our theological approach that have prepared us for this time and for this emergence and this being able to embrace mission in these new ways, in these very timely ways. I so love the images of the sun and the planets and the moons because those images and the language you've offered us will help us so much to first be able to name some of the things we've been a part of our lived experience for a while now that at many times have created a feeling of struggle and frustration and such uncertainty that it too has weighed us down to embrace the new things. So as our enduring principles were shared with us and as mission initiatives were shared with us, this weight of where we are in an uncertain future and the disappointments along the way, and what do we do with this investment of lives and money and resources in our buildings and things. How beautiful to hear you speak directly to the need that we have to be able to embrace, hold, and maintain for ourselves and for especially maybe our older members, the investment that they've made, and for them to be able to see an emerging church that makes use of those beyond that couple of hours once a week in church on Sunday. And everything that you shared has beautifully captured that. I also appreciate what Todd has shared, because he's pointing to that also in our shared lived experience, there has been an erosion of trust. And I think in our current political climate, I think it even adds to that. So to acknowledge that as we begin to share, I'll say it for myself, even in enthusiasm and excitement to share with others, I feel I need to step back, and I'm confident that we all will take the time to remember that there is a need to build trust throughout this process, to share as clearly as you have that this is not something that has to be a loss, but actually answers those questions of concern that we've been holding for so long. What do we do about, we can't get more families, we don't have the young people, and how do we maintain buildings with an aging population with limited resources? And so to do that in a way that builds trust, that rebuilds trust that has been lost, and carry that into the future. And I just want to add one more piece that, it reminds me of some things that the author Katie Day had put in a wonderful little book a while ago, talking about thin trust and thick trust was a big part of what she was speaking to. And she talks about that in the past, especially in this country, our communities developed around faith groups, around churches being at the center, and they were the ones that provided the connection and community and the potlucks, the community activities, the resources when there were community needs, when there were overwhelming things, whether it was fires or disasters, people came together and the churches gathered them together. And over time, that's been lost. And as I'm listening to you today, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, there is a place for us in today's world with everything that you've elucidated about where we are in generations and their needs and their not needs, what they're leaving behind in terms of faith structure and encapsulated entities, that we can again provide that basis for our people, for the people we connect with in community, and for the broader community. So as you can probably hear, this is just sparking ideas and connections all over the place. So thank you, and watch out for all of you in Northern Michigan here as we explore this. Last thing is, Lach, as this perfectly describes what we've experienced in Northern Michigan with our gathering of congregations on Zoom. And so we've had a core group that meets every week to debrief, to learn things about using Zoom better, communicating better, all those pieces. And, this great pause, this great reset that the pandemic has been, what beautiful timing, because we have realized we don't want to let this go. We don't want to go back to each of us siloed in our own little congregations, depleting our resources, time, and energy every week to just do a worship service, when that can be the shared experience that you just spoke to. So we got it. We're living it. And yeah, so we'll be talking more about it up here, I'm sure.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. Lach.
Yes.
Renee Congleton, my husband just spoke. I would like to, if this was online and we were emailing, I would just say, I'd like to bold print everything she said, put an exclamation point next to it, and just share personally. I won't go into great detail, although I'd love to, because I could talk forever about this. But thank you so much. Everything that you have just laid out in print, through answering questions, it is my testimony that I can put aside some fears, and where my husband's head has been for the last 6 months, and I have lagged behind because of questions and concerns. and my own hesitations. You have just opened the doors, and God's Holy Spirit has been alive in our kitchen. And thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
And amen back, Renee.
That sounds like the appropriate place to wrap up. I'll just with these closing words. Christ's mission is our mission. If you truly would be community of Christ, then embody and live the concerns and passion of Christ. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Lach. We're now at a time where we're going to take a break for lunch for a couple of hours. So thank you for all of your participation this morning and for your willingness to be open to all that's been shared. I hope that all these thoughts will continue to work in the back of your mind during lunch. And we'll be curious as we continue our conversations throughout the afternoon and all of our updates that we'll have opportunities to share together in the chats or otherwise what continues to come to mind. So we'll meet back here at 1 o'clock. We'll get some updates about what's going on in the Mission Center and some sessions to keep informed about resources and other opportunities for ministry. So I'll see you at 1 o'clock, same time, same place.